Hello, Jordi, and welcome to the FluentReads Founders for Growth. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Great, great, great. So I'm excited for our chat today about we're going to take a deep dive into a book and a nonfiction book, and then we're going to talk about some relevant topics related to the startup ecosystem. So
Great.
let's start off by how would you like to introduce yourself, Jordi?
I guess, and I'm going to tech enthusiast, if you know, but I'm in general a very optimistic, positive person. I would say I love technology, I love creativity, I love innovation, and I love books also. So I think that's what connected us. And yeah, happy to talk about that and more as long as we want.
Okay, perfect, perfect. All right, so we're going to get started. So why do you like reading nonfiction books in English, Jordy?
It's a good point. Why, I would ask also, why don't I like novels that much, right? I don't read that many novels, and people have suggested me so many novels and tried, and I've read some I like, but in general, I feel like the reason I take so much pleasure in nonfiction books is because I can clearly collect the knowledge, I can clearly get into specific thoughts, where a novel you have to like get your own conclusions and think or follow the story and like enjoy the story, which is great also. For nonfiction books, it's like I feel like I'm accumulating knowledge, which is something that I enjoy and that I kind of like always want to keep doing. So that's my feeling is like this is my grandmother used to say, they can take everything from you, but they cannot take what you have here, and that stuck with me a lot. And that's how I guess I look at it.
Okay, all right, perfect. And how's your reading experience in with these books? Do you have a preference? I see behind you have a lot of physical
Yeah.
copies.
Yes, I've tried digital. Like 2 years ago, I tried a asked, okay, gift for Christmas. You never know what to buy. I said, I want, my wife, I said, I want this and I want to give it a try. And it worked sometimes, but in general, I really love the idea of like the physical book. I see my percentage very visually. I fold pages to where I see interesting stuff and I want to go back. I want to keep it physically as like as a trophy. Really, I just like to look at the shelf and be like, oh, I enjoyed this, I love this idea, and go back to it. And um and that's why I like physical so much. And yeah, that's how I read. Then the downside obviously is you cannot carry 10 books with you, but you can also not read 10 books all at once. So I think that it's kind of a reminder of like this thing you're thinking about, and that you want to go back to, rather than an app on a phone or just this other device that doesn't have a face in a way of the book. And so I'm a big fan of still of paper. Maybe I'm old fashioned, but time will tell if they'll die in that format or not.
Okay. Okay, perfect. And how have these books, these nonfiction books, how would they help contribute to your own personal and professional growth?
A lot, as I was saying before, I love learning. I love accumulating knowledge, and I feel that's what defines me also in a way. Like the way I think, is the result of everything I learn. And so I remember very early on, like when I was a teenager already, reading books that were supposed to be advanced for me on like business or communication or advertising or branding or technology. And even people around would be like, why are you reading this? Because you're like 15. Why are you reading this? This is for like businessman or something. And I was like, I'm anxious to read the lectures, anxious in a good way. I'm like, I don't know if that's in a good, you can say that in a good way, but in my mind is like, I'm really, excited about learning about all these things that I can do stuff with, and grow. And so they really kind of like molded my view of the world and allowed me to become, whoever I wanted to become. That's the good thing. And then the internet increased this exponentially, but at that time, the internet wasn't so amazing. So my way to like really decide what I want to do in my life and how who I want to become was like, oh, look at this book. I can take this and grow it inside me and then become that person thanks to those thoughts, right? that it really shaped me. And I still, even today, there's so many knowledge that is not as properly organized in the internet, that you still, that this format still, is amazing format for you to, I would say, think on your own rather than just watch a video and be like super guided on the thought, where you, on a book, you're like reading and you're like, oh, and you get lost in that thought. That's something you might not do as much in a video, right?
Definitely, definitely. Okay, and tell us a little bit about your English language journey. How did you get to this point?
Well, the first thing I always say is that I talk a lot. I love talking, right? I think that's an important aspect, that motivates you a lot to learn another language. And again, early on, my parents signed me up for language school, but I always say I didn't learn much there. There was like lesson one. I still remember Mr. Pot the Painter. There was this childish book about Mr. Pot the Painter, and I didn't study. I wasn't. I think I have like some type of hyperactivity, or something that made it hard for me to pay attention and stay focused and stuff like that. But I loved interacting and I loved knowledge, like we said, right? So throughout the years, I realized I wanted to keep learning, and some of stuff that caught my attention was in English, like movies or some certain movies or certain books. And so it became clear, I guess, intuitively or even unconscious, like subconsciously, that I wanted to learn that language, to access that knowledge, And so I started watching certain movies and or buying certain books and just going through the pain, really, of learning those. And then I was lucky enough when I was 16 to go to Ireland for a whole month as a student. I would stay in, Irish family home and live with them, and then go to kind of like some classes of English classes and activities. And but the interesting point was when I became a teacher, a leader for kids to go, not a teacher, but like just a group leader. And that was a breaking point, because that forced me, the person that was in charge of the whole operation would call me, an Irish lady, and, would speak with me. That, I think, to me is just the fire test, where like she's talking, Jody, where is, I'm like, and then I'm supposed to reply something quite fast, That was when I realized, okay, I don't know enough. And that pushed me farther into, talking. And then the other point was 2012 when I moved in the US for a year. It wasn't, planned. I was supposed to be only a month. I ended up staying a year in Palo Alto, in Silicon Valley, which was like also mind blowing for my life. And I realized my English is decent, but if I want to work in technology or do something professionally, it's not good enough. And so that time, since then, around that time, I really literally switched and started to read everything in English, watch everything in English. And like, actually, I married my wife. She's from Russia, but we speak in English at home. We met in English. That stuck as our, lingua franca, and that's the language we use at home. So that made it easier also for me to keep my English level, I guess.
Okay, okay. You mentioned something interesting. Well, you mentioned several things interesting, but you were in Palo Alto, and if you could just tell us a little bit more about that, how it maybe served as a catalyst in improving your English in some ways, having that experience with being surrounded with other founders and
Yeah.
just to host the ecosystem.
Well, again, a lot, because what happens in Palo Alto is that, well, the reason, in my opinion, why Silicon Valley is successful, there's many reasons, like universities, Stanford is there, and Berkeley are there, the technology organizations or big companies. But one of the reasons is that these people is physically there. Now we're talking remote and everything. That still allows for progress. But when people bumps into each other in most of the cafe places in the downtown Palo Alto, that triggers, like, you can hear thousands of stories of founders meeting through some friend or some contact that they knew each other through some event or some company they work together. So I think that social aspect, again, being very talkative and sociable and social person, pushed me to like talk more and interact more. And also, one of the things I did in Palo Alto was start this with a friend. We had this house called Startup Embassy, and we rented it, and then we let people stay with us that were only entrepreneurs. And so you can imagine, we talked a lot there about technology and all kinds of things. and that pushed me even farther, right? And the other thing is what I mentioned before is that working, if you want to do something remotely professional, especially with Americans, I would say it's not enough to talk decent. I mean, it's enough, yes, but if you really want to play a role in leadership or like in my case, like product management, you really need to talk properly and have rich vocabulary and be convincing in your arguments. Otherwise, you're done. No, nobody's gonna listen to you. You're not gonna they're not gonna follow you or believe you because they're gonna yeah. You sound the problem with when you're not very fluent is that you sound less smart. That's to me one of the big problems with with learning a language is that you really sound less smart, and it was a pain to me. And I've met people and I talk about this with people who are like they think I'm like less smart because they don't hear how I speak in Spanish or in Catalan or in my native language, right? And that's a big deal. And I always push people to really just, like invest in your English, watch everything, read everything in English, go like Barcelona is a very international city, just go meet people, and because it is really powerful if you want to have a job in the kind of like, let's say the global economy.
Okay, okay, great. You've had an interesting life and these experience that you have of actually being, in the mecca of, the where it all essentially originated. So great, great.
Yes.
We're going to transition now to the book. We're going to be talking about the Lean Startup by Eric Ries. So can you tell us a little bit about this book?
Yes. The book basically, I think, made tangible an idea that was in the air that startups have been kind of like using already. What the book basically talks about is that to innovate, it's not an incremental improvement over whatever exists. You cannot just go and say, okay, we'll do, a better car. We'll just, this is how it works. Yes, that's one type of innovation. But what really the book sees is that for more substantial or even disruptive innovation, you really need to manage that innovation separately and approach it differently than like big companies basically do. And that the book is in a way for big companies also um, to say, okay, what I have to do is separate a little bit people and just follow this pattern of continuous learning, continuous improvement. I want to learn, I want to like test something, and then I want to measure it, and then I want to keep learning and try something else. And so this cyclical thing that sounds actually in a way incremental, but what the book says is like, you really need to do this separate from the other types of incremental innovation. And because there will be a lot of failure involved, a lot of failure. And that's what I feel, has happened in the last, especially, at a more massive scale where startups have become a thing in society in the last 10 or 20 years is that people has accepted that there's a lot of failure, a lot of experimentation. And I think that's the first book that really brought this idea kind of like to the mainstream, not as mainstream as TikTok, but definitely to the business mainstream, let's say. And I think that's what made it so popular, right? Like this idea, again, just to also as a reference, the books uses the lean notion from the Toyota origins, which is that this company was the first one that took the production chain of cars and allowed for changes even through the production process. So stuff wouldn't get worse and worse and then realize at the end, oh, we've been doing this wrong all this way, where you fix it early on by just accepting that you're making a mistake. Um, Things at the end arrive, like you save basically a ton of waste, a ton of unnecessary wasted time and wasted resources and wasted effort.
Okay, great, great, great. I'm excited to take the deep dive into this in this book with you. So we're going to basically divide this into your three top quotes and takeaways. All right.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to start reading your first quote, and
Perfect.
you can start with your analysis on this. The first one we have is the only way to win is to learn faster than anyone else.
Yeah, I think speed has become a clear aspect of success. There's other aspects, and I don't think, only speed, but definitely if you're not able to learn fast, you're just gonna be surpassed by other people who's able to learn fast, basically. And I think that the book is just the methodology to accepting that failing and learning fast is increases your chances of success greatly. Right? And so I don't even think it's about speed of like working fast or just working a lot or something. It's just like accept your failures fast, move on, take your learnings, and just go, move on to the next thing, and just keep trying and iterating. And I think that's the big deal that like people was like, oh, okay. And so especially again going back to the point I made before, in big companies, failure was like, oh, I'm gonna be fired, my career is over, like, and how am I gonna be seen? Where in startups, especially when you're like in the garage or like your office is like a crappy office space, right? You're like, look, we already look like a failure, so it doesn't matter if we, do this thing wrong because we believe it has potential, right? And so that's what big companies have been learning in the last, again, 10 years, especially 10, 15 years.
Okay. Okay, extremely useful. The next quote that you have is, if you cannot fail, you cannot learn.
Well, I think I connected, I guess, the speed with failure a lot already, um, because there's no. I'm sure there's some black swan company, some exceptional company, right? But I don't think there's that many companies that have succeeded without failures, a lot of failures along the way. I think one example that comes to mind, for example, is Apple. I think people look at Apple like, oh, they nailed it over and over. Like they came up with the iPhone. What a visionary company. And what a visionary founder. Like they look at Steve Jobs, like he knows everything. He knew everything and he knew, what people wanted. Like Steve Jobs made so many mistakes. I'm a big fan of Steve Jobs and we could do another podcast on Apple and Steve Jobs. I have read so many books and actually, yeah, it's a big inspiration in good and bad. And one of the things you learn is that he made so many mistakes, Apple and Steve Jobs. He was wrong so many times. But one thing that differentiated Steve Jobs, and it's in his official biography and another book that I like even more than the biography, is that he course corrected, he accepted that he was wrong. It took him a while. He was like, no, 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 no. And then he was like, okay, you convinced me. Okay, let's go with your idea, which is something that people tends to be uncomfortable with, right? They're like, oh, okay, yeah, I don't know, maybe you're right, but I don't know, and then maybe we'll do it, and then they spend so all this time just setting their own ego, you know, and it's like, I think it's like the sooner we're done, like I was wrong, let's move on, or we made a mistake, let's move on. I think that's a big deal. Yeah,
I think you bring up a great point because sometimes, in the startup culture, you hear the statistics, 9 in every 10 startups fail.
yeah,
Also in this, you have a lot of ego essentially in terms of admitting that you're wrong. Sometimes founders, in general, you can be so attached to the idea that you had and how you want to
yeah,
express that. And when someone
yes,
comes to counteract that idea, you can take it
yes,
as an attack in a
yeah,
way, and you're saying, no, 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 I have to. And it's having the awareness, self-awareness, to essentially say, wait, let's explore this a bit more and recognize
yes,
your own limitations in some way.
totally. In fact, it's funny. I always thought, I studied advertising, and I always thought kind of like it was a thing that I wouldn't use as much in technology. In reality, the degree of advertising has many things that are very powerful in the world we're living and the world we're heading to. And one of the things is this aspect of innovation. And because in advertising and in communication, ideas are the engine. Ideas are what moves the sector and the industry and in general the people in that space. And what you realize is that sometimes it's worth fighting hard for an idea that nobody sees, and sometimes you're just following your ego and differentiating that. And in advertising is common because you're like, oh, we're gonna do this whatever campaign, or I remember in university, right, like this idea, and people were like, that's a crappy idea. And you're like, no, no, it's so great. And then at some point you have to decide, is this a great idea or is this my ego? And that can be transported into business, into life, into so many things. And lowering that ego, I think, can be very powerful.
Extreme. Yes, yes, I agree so much. When we talk about failure, because this is a word, I mean, if you did an analysis on the lexicon in the startup community, you would
Uh-huh.
hear the word failure over and over again. And I guess this is a bit of a reframing that I like to use for myself. And in other situations, if we reframe that and say, okay, instead of just talking about failure, what if we switch this for learning opportunities? Because that's essentially what it is. I thought this was going to happen. It didn't turn out as desired. And essentially now this is a learning opportunity for us to move in the next direction or to move forward. What do you think about that simple switch and how that could possibly
I like it, but
maybe influence? Yeah, okay, okay,
I like it, but I have a joke I read a while
okay,
ago.
okay.
It's like, we need to change the word problem for opportunity. And then this joke, I think it was something like, I have a, it said, I have a drinking opportunity. It was so good.
Yes, yes, yes. We have language is a tool, and we have to be careful with the usage.
Exactly. So I think that, it brings up a good point, which is, yes, what you're saying, language is powerful. You can use it in your favor. But I think at the same time, let's accept the word failure as what it is. It's negative, but we're supposed to learn something from negative. So it's good, if you feel like some people might not be too comfortable with that word. Let's use the word opportunity. But at the same time, I think it's a good effort, a good exercise to say, okay, it's a failure. That's it. Let's not cry. Let's accept it, move on, and let's, learn from it, right? So we don't have,
Exactly.
so we don't play with the words and say, I have a drinking opportunity.
Exactly, exactly. Okay. And your third quote is success is not delivering a feature. Success is learning how to solve the customer's problem.
Yeah, I love that because as you, as a kind of like a product person, I actually I'm going to refer to another book, which is this one about the oh no, it's not going to come up. This the job to be done, the one that came up with the job to be done. I don't want to turn around and just look for
No.
it, but this, but the basic idea is that, and there's an example the author uses, which is people don't want a drilling machine; they want a hole in the wall, right? And if you think about the drilling machine too much, you will probably forget that what they want is a hole on the wall. And if you think about the hole in the wall, maybe you don't have to sell drilling machines, or maybe the features or the things you will build around or how you sell the drilling machine will change. And I think that's extremely powerful. And I think that's a huge lesson for anyone building solutions, not even only software, right? Is what is, and what this other book talks about is what is, the psychological context of that person. What are the emotions that person feels in that moment? What are the issues? What are the challenges they're facing in terms of, their problem? Really learning to empathize about their problem and their context can help you say, okay, we don't need to build these things. We don't need to build these features, right? What we need to is, and I think it tends to become deeper the way you build things and the way you look at solutions. And you end up, I think that's, again, just to give the Apple example, I think Apple never thought we need to build a phone like a tool for calling, right? And that's what most companies tend to like. We need to build this tool, and I think Apple never looked only at the tool, but like really the psychology of like what this empowers people to do. What's the context? What will happen when I put this amazing thing on your pocket and carry it around? And that's the powerful thing that companies are learning now, and that I think Apple influenced a lot in that sense, for example. And many companies now are taking it to a whole new level of understanding the customer's problems and not just building features, but really solving their problems.
Exactly. This comes to, for example, when they talk about, especially when you're in the idea phase or you're in the early stages, is you know, obsess over the problem, not the solution. So
Yes.
when you're like, sometimes you can get so attached to this is what I'm going to do. This is the new feature. I'm going to add this new
Yeah.
feature. This is going to make your life better. you're getting off course.
Yes, exactly,
What's the
exactly.
problem and it's like, yeah, so it's something that it's important to keep in mind.
Yes, I used to work at the Not Worldwide. Maybe you're familiar with this company. Um I worked there with many people I enjoyed working with. Specifically, there was Dave Leveson, the head of product, and I love that he and some other people in the company have this culture about like, let's talk about the hypothesis you have about why this makes sense, and what's the problem you think that our customer, not our customer, our users. In this case, we wouldn't even say users, we would say couples, because that's who uses the Not, couples that want to get married, and and so it was really a good way to talk always about the couples and their problems and how do we help them, enjoy this moment and make this moment better. And that was very, very useful, I think, for the success of the product. This is the leading company in this space for wedding, as a wedding marketplace and wedding solutions in the world, really.
Exactly. Okay. Moving on to your takeaways. The first one is, in the context of a big company, innovation needs to be managed, needs need to be isolated.
That's Yeah, that's the I think what companies are learning now, bigger companies. And I heard about one company, I'm not gonna say the name just in case, just in case. But it's a big Spanish bank and they want to innovate. They see the threat of technology, they see the threat of startups, and they're having a hard time, right? They have these big buildings and they have these, people who's been doing things, for years and years, and like this is how it's been done for all this time, and they're not changing. And so what I learned they're doing is, in order to change that culture and innovate, they literally started a new building, like a new building that's separate, that doesn't look like the old building. I mean, physically it might look like the old building, but once you're inside, it's still a bank office, but people see it a little bit more like a startup. People just organize themselves a little bit more like a startup in the sense of like the way they communicate, the way, even the walls, there's no walls, it's all open. People can dress more like a startup. And so culture, space, the way we communicate, the way we interact, the way you feel you can say things or discuss or changes the way you innovate. And so when Lean Startup talks about management also behaves in accordance to that culture, right? Like if you enter a place where everyone is wearing a suit and you're told to be the director, you're like, you're coming with a suit next day, right? And you're going to be like, you're going to want to adapt to that reality to have the biggest impact. When you go into this big bang and you say, okay, we're going to work in this other office, and you see everyone way more casual, way more direct, and, even, I don't know, friendly even in a way, you're just going to behave differently and be more, what in my opinion is potentially, a more human, more authentic you potentially, because we're not, in our bedroom, we're not wearing a suit and just talking professionally. That's something I strongly believe. We're talking normally and we're saying things normally. And so I think that management changes in this different approach to do things differently, to innovate, because in the other way things are confused by the shape it takes, by the way we communicate, by the way we write emails. No, send me an email, because otherwise, and in these other contexts, in a startup, you send a Slack, or you just stand up and just tell the person, hey, we're not going to do a meeting for this, I just want to tell you this is wrong, or whatever, and you take it, and things happen faster because of that. And management is a big reflection of that change. And if it doesn't change, you're not going to change your product and your innovation.
I think you bring up a great point with the importance of the environment. You understand what I mean?
Mhm.
And even if you could be in a great office in the
Yeah,
Google offices, you can be in a garage, you can be
yeah,
in a co-working space, but the environment and the energy or the standards that are set there are extremely important.
yeah,
And it may seem silly, but what are people wearing? Are they free to just come in a t-shirt, or are people
yes,
free to just do this? And that's extremely important, because in the end, we're constantly, directly and indirectly, we're signaling constantly what we're wearing, the types of
yes,
conversations we're having. Uh, do we eat together? Do we
yeah,
go out? What type of restaurants do we go to?
yeah,
All of these things
yeah,
contribute to the overall environment, which facilitates kind of like our actions in many cases.
totally. I think everything communicates something, and everything that is communicated brings a perception of something and it affects you. And if I learned something, another thing I learned in my career, in my degree in university, was this guy Václavic that created these laws of communication. And the second one, I don't remember the other ones, but the second one was you cannot not communicate. Literally, even if you're not trying to not communicate, you're communicating something. And so remembering this helped me know that like you're always communicating, so you better know, you better at least try to be intentional about what you're trying to do. And so, like you're saying, superfluous things or superficial things like the office or whatever, everything communicates something and helps people make decisions on the rest of the things they are doing.
Exactly. Okay. Your second takeaway is formulate hypotheses like a scientist and discuss them is key.
Yes, I think that science has changed um, the world not only by its discoveries, but by the method, the scientific method that I still find, surprising when people don't use it enough because it's a very basic idea. It's just, I have an hypothesis.
Mhm.
I'm going to test it in a way that it's as objective as possible. And then we're going to get some conclusions. That's the way most scientific discoveries have happened in different degrees of, like um, strict or discipline, right? But that's the basic idea. And I think that the lean startup just basically says like that's what you have to do. You have to have an hypothesis and validate it. And I don't think that means necessarily like the hypotheses or the numbers need to be like science in the sense you're not discovering. One thing I actually say a lot to sometimes to teams I work with is like, we're not discovering physics here. We're not discovering gravity. We're not, the outcome of our experiment is not going to be like, oh yes, this is a formula, exact formula. Sometimes it will be just conclusions on thoughts on theories that we have that if we do this, these will eventually grow or make this happen. But you need to approach it like the scientific method. You need to have hypotheses and more like validate them to a certain degree, and then take a bet if you're convinced that the result points in one specific direction.
Exactly. Okay. Very, very, very useful. And this leads into the theory only goes so far, like in
Yeah,
Oppenheimer.
exactly. And then that's exactly the continuation of that thought is like you can be all theoretical, you can use the scientific method, but I think that at some point people get lost in this A/B testing world where it's like, no, but the test says clearly that 70% is like, yes, but like one thing that happens also in science is that sometimes experiments are not properly conducted, or we cannot control everything. Like, oh, we're gonna put this A/B test, and this means that people taps in this button because it's rounded. Well, they tapped in this button more, but we don't know everything. So you need to use your imagination sometimes and be like, okay, let's go with our intuition. I think intuition should be, considered in a better way. I think intuition is used sometimes as a way like, this is my opinion. So I
Mhm.
think we should all be able to argue and say we have all different perspectives. But then, also understand that there's moments where intuition needs to be trusted. And, that balance is the tricky challenge to find.
I agree with what you're saying. It's important because especially in Western culture, we highly value science and results and data, things, whatever. And sometimes it can hinder us in some ways because this reductionistic view of microscopic in a way of saying this is what this says, this is what this says, this is what this says, and it's like no, you kind of have to step back and look at the forest. Sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. So being able
Mm.
to use that and say, okay, based on this, or maybe even framing it in a way when you're explaining this to someone, like this is what we have, but intuitively speaking, based on my experience, now you're introducing the intuition, the imagination, essentially, and it's a way of maybe even separating and making it clear in this distinction when you're trying to effectively communicate this to other people as well. What do you think about that?
Um, Wait, can you repeat what part of what you said? Sorry.
Okay, no worries. So what you're talking about is having the scientific approach,
Yeah,
okay, to this, but it's also important to rely on that, those gut feelings, your
yeah,
intuition, and intuition is something that is essentially it's cultivated throughout your life. So it's
yes,
like it's this cocktail of your life experiences,
exactly.
your own biases, your beliefs, etc. And this manifests in some way
Yeah,
as from an emotional state. And you say, okay, I have a hunch. This is
yes,
telling me that maybe we should go in this direction because I saw an interview yesterday
uh,
or my own personal experience.
yeah,
So mixing this, creating kind of like your own cocktail in a way
yes,
of, okay, this is the hard data. This is what we have, but we can't be so microscopic
yeah,
and only
exactly,
follow this. We
exactly,
have to
exactly,
back
exactly.
up and have a bit of this
Yeah,
bird's eye view, and say, we have this, but now we're going to fuse it with this, and this is the following steps we're going to take.
yeah. I agree. I have a theory actually that our intuition, has been the inspiration. I think it's not a theory. I think it's real, but maybe I'm not knowledgeable enough about the subject. But that all this AI situation, all this revolution, has taken the brain as an inspiration, right? And how machine learning works. There's different ways. There's a way of, basically the system just tries everything, right, over and over and over. And there's like these, I've seen these videos of like virtual, I don't know, virtual humans or virtual dogs or whatever that they leave them there and they say, now learn to walk. And like they spend, whatever amount of hours just trying to move legs until they just getting it and they're optimized to have that behavior. I think that's basically what we do as humans. We just make mistakes. There's certain things we learn by looking at others, but basically we make mistakes. So I think that what the important part about intuition is that when you do a mistake, you savor it, you look at it in the face, because that way you really, I think, integrate that learning. Otherwise, if you're not listening or like no, I'm never making mistakes, I think maybe your intuition then is too influenced by your ego, or maybe potentially, you'll keep making mistakes. There's, I think to different degrees, we all keep making a different amount of mistakes, but I think that the people who make maybe more mistakes is the ones that are listening less to the mistakes they made in the past, and so they train your intuition less. That's my perception, at least my theory.
Okay, no, I totally agree with what you're saying. It's important to just have different perspectives and not take things as certainty. In the end, everything is an exploration, and time would
Yeah,
essentially tell you more or less uh, how close you were to your to your
yeah,
hypothesis in some
yeah,
way.
exactly.
Yes, yes. So this sounds like the lean startup I also read it some time ago provides a lot of actionable advice. Who would you recommend this book to? Obviously, this is heavily recommended in the startup community, but is it something that you say every founder should read this book, or maybe the team should take into consideration? Who would you recommend this book to, and why?
Well, actually, I don't think it's the most actionable book.
Okay,
I think
okay,
it's if you're action oriented person, you can get your conclusions about about how to use it. I think so. If I had to choose, I think, yeah, startups might be an audience, but I definitely think the corporate, business people, let's say, is the one that are going to take the most of this book, because I think the idea of lean startup is already ingrained in the startup world. So it's like whatever you read, you'll hear this idea, and so if you read it, the better. But it's not something you're hearing this idea all the time of like, go, like, get out of the building, right? This other author that is that created in a way together with other degrees this idea of just experience the world and try things and iterate. But that's a harder sell or a harder notion for bigger companies, as I was saying before. So I think the lean startup would be definitely a book that anyone working in a big company that wants to bring change and wants to change things and feels like, oh, things are not changing, or they're not listening to me, or they're not, that's a good book for you to understand that that's a different context from the garage reality. And maybe it gives you ideas on how to, bring change to your organization.
Great, great. I think I love your perspective because sometimes, again, we were talking about being microscopic or reductionistic and say, oh, well, the obvious target is every founder, every et cetera. But you said, no, no, no. Think about the corporation, the big, the big company who kind of has more of a, a fixed model. They're less agile simply because of
Yep.
the infrastructure. So introducing this book, whether it's through a department book club or upper level executives, whomever, it could be a great way of framework to kind of like take a few nuggets from this that you can perhaps implement in some way.
Yes, totally.
So, talking about the reading experience, what is reading books like this? Not necessarily specifically like the lean. Well, talking about the lean startup, when you think about the from the language focus, how does this help optimize or improve your English in some way? Whether it's an expression or like how what comes to mind related to this?
Well, comes to mind another book, if you allow me. One book I really like called Talent is Overrated. I don't know if you heard about this book. This is one of the books that promoted this idea of 10,000 hours and this, and especially the idea of intentional training. And I think that that's what I try to do with books. I try to do with different content I read, but books, especially for English, are a good way for you to see vocabulary to express things. And I try to be as intentional as possible. I'm reading about something, I'm paying attention, I'm lost in my thoughts. But I try to have a part of my brain that, paying attention to like, oh, look, this is this word, look at this context, look at this expression to say this. And and I think that's something like the intentional training where you're not just reading, you're trying to learn. And I try to do that whenever possible and whenever I have the mental energy. It's not always, you cannot always be at 200% reading
Exactly.
a book. But if you are, you can learn a lot of new vocabulary, new words to express things in a different way.
Okay. All right. Perfect. And one last thing about the lean setup. It's you talked about maybe it's not the most actionable book, but can you think about something that you were maybe able to apply yourself or someone you know based on something, a takeaway or something from this book, an idea even?
Yes, there is. I didn't want to say it was not actionable, but like I feel like, especially if you're thinking about startup books, or certain innovation books, there's some more actionable. But it's true that there's some actionable aspects of the book. For example, this idea of, I don't remember the name exactly now, but there's different ideas on how to test those ideas that you have. And one of them is just build something that looks like the finished product, but it's not, right? I don't know if you remember. I think it has to do something with the Wizard of Oz, right? Wasn't it? Or the man
Yeah,
behind
I
the
think it's
curtain.
the
Exactly,
man
the
behind the
man
curtain.
behind the curtain.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's the theory. So you're the man behind the curtain. There's nothing, real like in the Wizard of Oz. I hope I'm not spoiling anyone anything if they know about that book at this point. But that's the idea. Like, oh, I have an idea for this marketplace, or I have an idea for this service that does this, and people comes in and they do this, and this amazing thing with AI or with these 3,000 employees will make it happen, right? Before getting, start hiring the 3,000 employees or just building a crazy expensive AI, just build the front page, build a site that looks finished, and just go into Google Ads, spend, €5 or whatever, and just have some traffic be sent there and get a sense of people interest. And like, then again, you can get your conclusions on why people is not doing what you expected to do, but they might give you already some clues as if there is actual interest. Or you can do that website and send it to some friends and like, oh, look at this. And then the idea behind the men behind the curtain is that um, people will do something and you won't tell them, but you're manually doing what someday 3,000 employees or the AI will do. And you're taking 10 times more, obviously, and 10 times more effort than when that is automated, but at least you're validating, right? And you haven't spent, nearly as close as what you would if you thought your idea is validated. But then once
Exactly.
you're validated that people either want or not want, they're like, oh, okay, people is coming in, signing up. I can not do this anymore. Now let's invest in the AI or 3,000. Or if it's not the case, you just saved a ton of money and time.
Exactly. I think this is extremely important. And now we even have so many tools, whether it's just building a simple like prototype, whether it's like using Figma or anything or whatever, to kind of get that out there. Because sometimes a misconception is, when they talk about that build and they will come. And it's like, well,
Yes.
no, this is
No.
you spend so much time building the things like, okay, now it's ready. You have to start before you're ready. And this is something that I constantly
Yeah.
this is kind of like the inception of these interviews in a way, because I felt like I was in a stage of analysis paralysis, and it's like, no, you have to start talking, about books, you have
Totally.
to start like,
Yes.
and then from that you gain momentum and you can essentially take it from there. But being stuck in your head and thinking about these hypothetical scenarios that you have no
Yes.
evidence that they actually exist,
Yes.
it's really important to keep that in mind.
Yes, I totally agree. Actually, I'm in a similar situation as you probably know. I have a YouTube channel in Spanish. I've done some many videos about books, and I'm doing also a podcast now. And my goal is to talk about like this conversation, interesting conversation about thoughts and interesting people. And what I found also in the different times I tried, promote like doing something with YouTube is that if you think too much, it's too much effort. You end up taking either too long or not doing it. And recently, I uploaded some videos where I'm like specifically the first podcast, for example, there's some audio technical issues. There's no intro. There's nearly zero. It's nearly zero editing. But and some people tells me that, and I'm like, yeah, but like if I have to edit this, and I've edited a long time, but I'm a father now. I have less time, or my priorities are others. I prefer to ship, like we say in Prague, like ship. And in this case, it worked. Actually, people likes it. Some people say, "Oh, there's some issue there with audio," but fantastic conversation. We can hear. People is not as picky as we think they are, and so it's better to start. In fact, when I had my own startup, I had a banner on the wall, of, a quote that I really like, which is "better done than perfect." And it's good to be a perfectionist for certain things, but it's better done than perfect. Definitely, always, especially when you're starting out.
Exactly. This makes so much sense, because when you get into kind of like the meticulous aspect of, when I first did my the first interview and things, whatever, and from the creator point of view, you're thinking about, oh, the intro, oh, there's like skipping here, oh, the audio is not so good. In the end, to kind of like summarize this, are you giving value or not? And if you are really giving value, the person's not really going to remember if you didn't have an intro to the podcast, or if it skipped a bit or whatever. Were you able to provide some sense of value to them? And that's something that's kind of the guiding principles that we need to move forward. And that's why it's really important to kind of get out of your head and start before you're ready, because you need to iterate. And this brings me to, I've read several of his books. Seth Godin, who's kind of like considered like, this marketing, or he got in his, one of his latest books was, like the practice. And you're talking about, just ship it. It's good enough. And shipping your work is extremely important, because we get into this, and this is a debatable topic, because I've never really considered myself a perfectionist, and I feel like I've saved myself a lot of trouble for this, because this obsession of it has to be extremely perfect, I never really identified with this. I was personally, I've been able to say, okay, this is good enough, because perfection would probably require me to outsource this. You understand what I mean? I'm not a
Mm-hmm,
video
mm-hmm.
editor. I'm not a
Uh-huh,
professional writer. So the perfectionism, there's no need for me to entertain that idea, because I'm not
uh-huh.
the expert. I guess I've subscribed more of a generalist, which brings me to the book, Range, which talks about this. It talks about, we live in a world of like this this obsession of specialization, which it has its place, but we also have to think about the role of the generalist, the people who has this eclectic approach of, I did a little bit of this, I started with marketing, I went to Silicon Valley, I did this, and now I'm bringing this all together, and now you have it in front of you. And sometimes we don't realize the value and even a superpower that lies in that, because we're so focused on, oh, it's not perfect, I don't know this much, or I don't have the expertise in this thing, or I don't have my 10,000 hours to become the expert. So it
Yeah,
can be extremely debilitating in some ways,
totally.
and we have to kind of like keep our mindset. It's like, okay, where's the North Star? The North Star is to provide value, to create community, etc. The rest, it brings me to another. I remember listening to this on the podcast years ago with the founder, and he says, if you're not embarrassed or laughing at the version that you produced 2 or 3 months ago, or even sometimes weeks, you're not moving fast enough. Like you should cringe
Yeah,
and say,
exactly.
I can't believe like this was my
Yeah,
first podcast or whatever,
yes,
because
yes, yes.
that's a sign that you're moving forward, and it's perfectly
Totally.
fine.
Totally. Actually, one of the books I read many years ago that also impacted me was from this author, Guy Kawasaki. I don't know if you know him, like this startup world
Yeah.
guy. He used to work at Apple. He's super interesting. And I actually even met him like for a photo in a Madrid event. And he had this book, The Art of the Start. He has it. And one of the chapters is, don't worry, be crappy. And that was his idea. Don't worry, be crappy. Be crappy. And it's what you're talking like it's okay to be ashamed, just start.
Exactly. When you look at your interviews or something that you created, I mean, sometimes if you even look back and look at your social media post, something you posted maybe 5 years ago, you may even cringe at it. And it's
Yeah.
like it's important to keep that in mind, because sometimes we're stuck in the past, or there's an obsession with the future. But this present moment is say, okay, what can I do now? What can I move forward? This goes into when there are a lot of books on productivity optimization. The Atomic Habits is extremely possible.
Mhm.
If you just simply think about, okay, what does today look like? What does that 1% look like in terms of, once I created this video or this podcast, what does a slight 0.05% look like for the next interview or for the next thing? And if we use that as a framework, I think it can be extremely useful for us in many
Yeah.
aspects.
And there's another variable also of that, which is when you start, you have no audience. So it doesn't matter if it's crowded because nobody's listening, right? So if you already have a 10 million audience, well, then, you probably have the resources to make it perfect. So I think that you have to accept that. I don't know who was saying this, but I totally agree, which is nobody cares. Nobody cares about you. It's okay. Just maybe they'll care someday, but right now nobody's listening. So just start, and then eventually maybe they'll be listening, or they'll be watching, or they'll be paying attention. And when they do, by that time you'll have become a perfect producer of whatever you use your craft, right? But right now, don't take yourself so seriously and just cheap and just get failure and accept it and move on, right? And just keep doing. And the main point I think also this takes us is, why are you doing this? If you're doing
Mm,
just for the fame or the the recognition, immediate like recognition, you have to very much understand yourself, if that's what will make you happy, or the reason you'll keep doing this and stay motivated. And I think this takes you to, or at least has taken me maybe a year too, is like, oh no, I'm doing this because I care about this subject. I enjoy doing this. So I would do this even if, for the next few months or years, not that many people listen. At least my family or my friends will say, oh, this is interesting. That's the start. That's the start. And if you're willing to do that, I think you'll find where you're actually good at and passionate, and take those learnings and then maybe build something around it that more people cares about.
exactly. I don't know where that quote comes from, but it brought me to mind Stephen Pressfield, which is one of his most famous book is The War of Art, and it talks about that creative process where we
Mhm.
essentially have resistance, and resistance is basically what's keeping you from moving forward. And usually in life, or if we're talking specifically in the professional aspect, the bigger the resistance is, the more you need to strive toward or move in that direction, essentially, because it's very easy to think, when you going back to like Seth Godin, I listened to his podcast as well, Kimbo. He talks about, sometimes in many cases he doesn't talk about his writing techniques, what software he uses. If you think about another context, some podcasts would say, well, what software are you using, what video camera, what camera all of these are excuses for you to
Uh-huh.
for you to move forward. You
Yeah,
have a phone in your pocket, which is extremely powerful. Pull
exactly.
out the phone, press record, and get started.
Yeah,
And I think this is the great thing about, whatever, if you want to, whatever opinion you may have on it's social media or TikTok in many ways, because you have this creator economy where people are just pulling out their phones, talking, no makeup, no filters in some cases. And this is, I think it's a great incentive somewhat because it's letting you know, you're seeing representations like this person has 1 million views and they're just talking in their sweatshirt. Giving
Exactly.
they're giving an opinion
Yeah.
about something they think, and we all have coming back to him again. I'm like, I'm not promoting his books or anything. He's not paying me. But Seth Godin, he has another one, Tribes. And
Yes.
Tribes is we all have our tribes essentially. We move in humans where we're social. We move in communities. And that tribe comes together through an idea, and this idea is shared. And this typically they have a leader and they have a way to communicate with each other. So sometimes when you're thinking about who am I reaching or whatever, you need to put out the work because there's kind of this gravitational force that happens in some way and you attract them and you get the people when you go into like the whole like Y Combinator and the Paul Graham of
Uh-huh.
writing his articles and you say you prefer to have 100 faithful customers, I think, instead of like 100,000 people who kind of like the product. You understand what I
Yes.
mean? So
Yeah.
it's really important because when you think about numbers, and we can focus too much on this to say, well, no, I have 100 or I have 200, but this person has 100,000. It's not about the
Yeah.
number that they have. Who are the true fans? This is
Yeah.
Kevin Kelly, your 1,000 true fans. Who are the true fans that are
Exactly.
behind the product? And these are the people. These are kind of like your disciples. Your fanboys
Yeah.
in a way. And we have to reframe this and not be obsessed with the quantity, the likes, who's actually taking action and who's supporting you.
Yes. Couldn't agree more. Yeah. Better to do something that some people care about a lot
Hmm.
than just try to be this mainstream thing from day one, which, again, why? Why do you, right? I think
Yeah.
like, if my podcast is heard by millions of people, that will be amazing. I'll promote the ideas I believe in. But I think the path to get there is what actually will be, the main experience of it, the main, learning for me. And then I'll be a different person when I get there, rather than just, oh, here's a million people out. It's then I like it's like, winning the lottery in a way. You don't know how to manage money even if you have to. There's all these cases of like people who, bought like crazy stuff and then they were poor again. So I feel
Mhm.
that with attention, which is part of what we're dealing with in this context, I think it's the same thing. You better understand the power of attention and what you're gonna do with it, and you win it yourself
Yes.
than
Yes.
just expect it to be given. And that's
Exactly.
also the influencer culture and this influencer like TikToker stuff that's happening. I feel like some people. And to give actually to me a good example is Mr. Beast, the guy, the
Yes.
YouTuber.
Yes.
I'm liking more and more this guy. Like I used to see like him, like his videos and be like, oh, this is YouTuber stuff, like just about the fame. But the more I learn about him, the more I like him. This guy started like you said, like with his sweatshirt in his dorm room and just literally talking at the camera and saying like I like this YouTube stuff and like this talking to the camera, and he said I want 1 million. Like he was ambitious, but at the same time he was just starting, and I like that very much. And you see he's a good person, and he's using
Yeah.
his he's reinvesting everything in every video. It's like crazy the millions he's spending.
Yes.
Like he lives in the place where they produce the stuff. Yeah, I think it's like the Elon Musk of content creation in a way. Elon Musk used to sleep in the factory.
Yes, I heard about this. I heard
So
about
that's
this. Yeah.
that's that's why I said it, because it's the same idea. He's lived in the shooting place.
Great. Great. So we're gonna wrapping up with the books. We have two more books you're gonna briefly recommend. You can give a brief like a summary of what they are about and maybe who you would recommend the book to. We're gonna start with Hooked.
Perfect. Hook is a book about how, especially digital products, are built to hook you, to get you to come back. And it's a simple book. It's a small book, but it brought this idea to light in a very simple way, which is this hook cycle. And I think it's an interesting read for both people who build a product and, as the author says, people who wants to understand how we are hooked into this product. In fact,
Mm.
he wrote another book called Undistractable, I think it's
Indistractable, yes.
Indistractable. Sorry, and he's kind of like defending this idea that he's really writing these books to protect people about from this manipulation, right? And but I think it's not that Machiavellic, this book in particular. So it's a good read, and we will get you to understand more how the worst example to me is TikTok in a way, like how TikTok literally is designed, and Instagram in a way, to keep you going back, and just spend too much time, I feel, in that app.
Okay. All right. And the other one was Grit.
Grit talks about this notion of grit. I don't know, even maybe because English is not my native language, I don't know if this word she invented it even or something, but or it was just a common word already. But she talks
It
about
was
it as it's. Sorry, no, go ahead.
continue. No, no, it's popular. The word exists. It was popularized, I think, more by the book. 'Cause it's like a combination of perseverance, tenacity, the ability to move forward.
Exactly.
Yeah. Hmm.
Exactly. She just talks about this idea, this mix of, I think it's passion and perseverance, and how this is used by some people to achieve anything in a way. I think it made me think a lot about, to be honest, it made me think a lot about if it's worth it. Like, I feel in a good way, in some ways good, like, okay, it's amazing to have this good and just achieve anything you want. In some others, and I think the book also touches on this, is it worth it sometimes? Is it worth it to do this extreme dedication to certain things, or is it better just not be the next whatever Zuckerberg or the next Bill Gates or whatever, and just be good at something, be passionate, enjoy, and then have a life. At least that was my outcome of the book. So for some people, I think that already the people who are like very extremely you know that have a lot of grit already. Maybe they don't even read the book. They're just like, focused on whatever they're doing. It's a good thought. It's a good thought. I think a lot about discipline and just staying focused on something because I feel something I'm not the best at. I need to be very
Hmm.
emotionally, motivated to do something so much. But so it's a good book for thinking around that idea.
I totally agree with you saying. Sometimes we can be absorbed or even bombarded with like a mainstream idea or narrative of this is what a career looks like, this is what a startup looks like, this is the exit, this is the unicorn, this is, and you it require, and this is why it's important to get the ball rolling and just move forward, because through this you cultivate your own self-awareness and you say, okay, I'm cognizant of this is a roadmap essentially of how I can develop myself in my career or as a founder, etc. But I'm also aware of the fact that I have other priorities as well, whether it's the time I want to spend with my child or the amount of hours I want to dedicate this, the amount of employees I want to hire. And I think it's extremely important to have, and I hope, that's what I like also about like the interviews with FluentReads, to kind of share those perspectives to say, okay, I thought I saw myself reflected in Mark Zuckerberg, but actually watching this interview with Jordi, I like that. I connect with that. Give me a mini roadmap and how I can do that. And that's extremely important, especially when you're heavily influenced sometimes when you lack that experience in your own journey in some way, because you're you get hooked on the trends, what's put in front of you in the magazines or in the movies, etc. And you have to kind of develop with, that's good, but that's good maybe for that person. I'll take 50% of that, 60% of that, and maybe apply it to my own life.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. I think we need to find our own path, and just, and that's a hard thing because everyone is telling us what to do. And right, especially with the internet, everyone is telling us how to be successful and everything and who to be and what to be. And I think, yeah, you need to find your own formula and, maybe it's perseverance and maybe not. Maybe it's just moving to an island and just, having something plans and I don't know, whatever makes you happy.
Exactly, exactly. Another book drop, I guess. It can still be applicable in many ways. If you think about kind of like the 4 hour work week with Tim Ferriss, and he goes into this, it's more of it's a lifestyle in a way, or the
Yes.
optimization. And this is for a percentage of people. It's not for everyone, but that's the great thing. One, reading nonfiction books to kind of get that, like the 4 hour work week, maybe I can extrapolate 10% of that, or maybe 100%, depending on the person. So it's kind of like you're constantly adjusting,
Yeah,
what fits in well with you.
totally.
Okay. Okay. So, Jordy, what we're going to do is we're going to transition into the topics related to startups for the startup scene. So, we're gonna I'm gonna bring up the topic and you can give your own perspective on it, maybe a story or anecdote, and we'll just have an informal chat about it. All right.
Perfect.
Okay. Let's start with product market fit.
Want me to go ahead and just share my
Just go
thoughts?
ahead. Go ahead. Product market fit. What is this? What comes to mind?
Product market fit is discovering that there is an actual problem you're solving and you can make money from solving that problem and satisfying users. And that's hard because sometimes, it's hard to solve problems and it's hard to find them. Well, it's not hard to find them, it's hard to solve them, I would say, in the way, with technology or with the knowledge we have as entrepreneurs. And I think that sometimes entrepreneurs are like, oh, I have this AI thing, and then this is going to be used by people. And then, there's no problem there. Maybe there people don't want to use AI to just, I don't know, have, get recipes for cooking. You know what I mean? And you're like, no, but I know a lot about cooking and I know a lot about AI, and so this is perfect. But like, yeah, but like people don't. So product market fit is really just this effort of like taking away your ego and just being like, oh, nobody cares about this. Maybe I need to do something else, and that's it.
Okay, perfect. Let's transition in to value proposition.
Value proposition.
Yes.
Value proposition, I think, has to do a lot with what we discussed before, also about the job to be done. I think it is related to the idea of understanding, what value do you bring to the user and making sure that's actual value and they care about it, because you can say we're the fastest transfer money transfer in the world, and then that turns out it's not the case, but like turns out people don't care about money. It's speed transfer, let's say, right? And so value proposition is making sure that the value you want to deliver is actually what the people want. And so I think people, sometimes companies get lost in marketing there and just like, we're the strongest, the fastest, whatever, where what you really need to say is like, 1,000 songs in your pocket was the iPod line, right? 1,000 songs in your pocket, not a gigabyte hard drive or like, amazing, whatever, buttons or like the made of metal. It's 1,000 songs in your pocket. That's like, that's an amazing value proposition.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. Okay, so let's move on to purpose and vision alignment.
Actually, I think companies don't take this seriously enough. And especially from the product management perspective, let's say, when I'm asked sometimes by startups or companies like, oh, but how do we get people to build these? And basically it's like, how do we build this fast and are successful? And sometimes people expect these theories like, yeah, you put this framework, and do this spreadsheet, and then people will just, magically produce what you want them to produce. And the reality is what you want is people to understand why you're doing what you're doing. And when I say people, I mean in this case the team. And one thing I from the product perspective, I try to bring into the table a lot, which is, hey, here are our users. They care about these things. This is this person, and they woke up today and they're not using our product because we're not solving, but this other one is using it because she's happy when she uses it, because she cares about this and this and this. She lives in this city. She cares about this stuff. And then you show a video of them using it, and then all of a sudden people gets it and they care and they wake up happy about building that product and about satisfying these users, because we all want, to contribute and to, help other people and to do something that has an impact. And so the more people, I think the companies have transitioned a little bit from, the Wall Street craziness, whatever, in the 70s or whatever, or this idea that businesses are to return the investment to to stockholders. This type of stuff has, like, luckily started to fade. And now it's like companies are satisfying problems, are like really solving problems for the world and making money. The better, the more money you make because you should be solving problems the better. And so that's the purpose aspect where people want more and more to work for companies that that they like, that they know they like, that they solve some problem and that they align with that problem. And so if your company doesn't have that purpose, you're going to have a harder time making money, hiring people, finding the best people, and being happy, right? You're going to be like, nobody wants to work for me. I don't even want to work for that place. You know what I mean? For my company, right? It's
Exactly. It's
critical.
yes, as you said, it's transmitting your why in a way, and not just transmitting it in terms of verbally talking about it, but the actionable aspect of that, of like there's a feeling, there's an aura in the space in the room that okay, this is meaningful. This is because we can hide behind business terms and things, all of this, but in the end we're a group of humans working and collaborating together essentially, and we can't take that out of the equation. And now, or not only now, but you're spending a significant part of your life, working with these people. In many cases, throughout the week during a normal work week, you see your colleagues more than you see your partner or your children in
Yeah.
many ways. So
Yeah.
there's we can't ignore that factor, that importance of whether it's team building or facilitating or cultivating some company culture in some way to kind of address those needs as well, because you can't convince people or get a group of people to rally behind you to say, okay, let's try to make the most we possibly can for our investors. And everyone's
Yes.
like, yes, I'm willing to sacrifice my life for this.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Nobody will. Even the motivation of money is very limited. There's a lot of studies that have shown that when people have the basics covered, it's very hard to get, people to do anything for money. I mean, up to a point, and some people will do things and they'll bend their ethics and everything. But in general, to scale the ability to have a general workforce, everyone as humans, working for different companies, money has its limits. It's a good
Mhm.
companion or side effect, and people will definitely value it and take it into account. But at the end, the decisions you make are very emotional about why you do what you do.
Exactly. Okay. Talking about people, let's let's explore a little bit the remote work and virtual teams.
Okay. Um, I work remotely for the last 3 years, I guess. Yeah. And I've worked remotely in the past. I lived in an island for 2 years in Menorca in the Mediterranean. And it wasn't truly remote in the sense that the company was there, but most of my interactions every day were with people outside the island. And I thought about it. And well, on one side, in general, I like the remote or mostly remote. I'm okay to go to the office a few times, I don't know, a month, but I like the quality of life you get, especially if you have a family. I like my freedom to organize my space, the way I work, to be focused. And then you can still have a social life if you can go to the office again, like I said. But the team aspect is tricky, right? Because all this conversation about like what is, more productive, what allows us to innovate more, to exchange ideas. I think it's once again a culture thing where you have to accept that this new paradigm demands, it's not just go home and work for home and we expect to have the same results. No, all of a sudden is the home is the office is not a thing. It's a virtual notion that you have to substitute with new rules. And to me, those rules have to do a lot with how do we interact, how we exchange information. It cannot be using the same rules. We cannot say, let's do a meeting at 3 p.m. and just we all join this call and just have the meeting. This is not a factory. This is humans exchanging ideas. So I found some tools need to change. And those tools might influence the culture. One tool in particular I'm everything. But
Okay, okay. All right, so you can continue. Yes.
so about remote work, again, I think that it has a lot to do with accepting that the rules have changed. And so if you're a mostly remote company, am I losing you? You're there, right?
No, I'm here. I'm here.
Okay, okay, okay. So in regards of remote working, I think the rules have changed, and you just have to accept that, and that means that it's not just the desk is at your home now. It's literally change the tools, change the culture, change the way you interact or you expect people to be interacted with, and so that means email plays a different role in a remote world, in my opinion. Now the power tool might be Slack or might be something else, and the one I found more impactful is a tool called Gather. Is this small video game kind of thing style. Have you seen Gather?
No.
No, it's like literally like a 2D virtual world where you have an avatar, a small avatar. Every employee has a small avatar. You design with whoever, somebody designs, somebody in the company can design the space and put like tables and put like whatever virtual pools, or imagination is the limit. And and then when you're working, you leave Gather open in one window. And when you want to talk to somebody, instead of just, opening Slack and saying, hey, I need these numbers by today, you just move your avatar towards that person and you see maybe that person is talking to somebody and you can join the conversation. The moment you get close enough, the camera goes on and they can see you and you can see them. And it's very interesting, in my opinion, because it allows people to have a proxy, right? A version of that virtual world. And you can get close to somebody and say, hello, are you busy? And their camera doesn't switch on automatically, but they hear you. If they have the window open with Gather, they hear you. They're working and they hear, hello, are you busy? And they're like, oh, and then you go to Gather and then you open your camera. And then, so it has many things that I think wouldn't work in a physical world. But if you're mostly remote or fully remote, it's a very good substitute or a very good new version of this world we're heading to that will still bring that level of, I think, randomness in talking with people or even social life of like just having conversation and then just going back to work in a way similar to the coffee machine idea of like, oh, we meet in the coffee machine and here's like these virtual spaces where you just, when you have a moment, you just look around. Oh, I see this other person. I think it generates a little bit more of that randomness that we might be losing in the virtual world. So that's my reading of the situation.
Okay. And we just have a couple more. We have lifelong learning and continuous improvement, which is like part of connecting this with like the building a growth mindset in some way.
Yeah, yeah. I think they're related both even with lifelong learning in a way. I don't know why I like learning things. I don't know why some people like learning things and some people not. Uh, I think curiosity, like I have here, stay curious, is a notion to be promoted. I don't think my parents specifically said, "Oh, you have to be curious," but I think maybe life brought me to understand that being curious brings good things, and just
Yeah.
um, yeah, brings good things, to put it simply. And
Yes.
so the more you do it, the more you get positive results and positive, outcomes and things in life. So I think it needs to be promoted. I think, stay curious, stay foolish, was it? No, stay hungry, but to me it's the same, right? Steve Jobs, stay hungry, stay foolish. I think that, stay curious to keep discovering this world and growing and just making a life a little bit more complete, let's say, because it's only one and we're gonna die eventually. So at least you tried and investigated and just tried things, and at
Exactly.
least you'll look back and be like, oh, I was curious enough to try that thing or to meet that person or to do that thing,
Exactly.
which will be a much better feeling than just like, oh, I tried. It was like a very peaceful and calm life, but that's it. It was not. I think it's better life, my opinion, my perspective, obviously.
Exactly. I mean, curiosity is it's It has this magical sense in a way because you typically, I mean, even our conversation now, you light up talking about it, how you go into like
Yes.
these different rabbit holes and you explore them, and you're
Yes.
without even realizing it, and even realizing it, you're you're collecting dot you're collecting dots so we can later connect the dots. You know what
Yes.
I mean? So
Yes.
and this is what it comes to. Sometimes in the moment you don't know. I remember even reading a book by it's called Curious by Ian Leslie. And
All right.
he talks about these two types of curiosity, like epistemic curiosity, and how it's basically like one you're going deep down the rabbit hole and another one is more superficial. Obviously he
Interesting.
has a preference in going down these deep rabbit holes essentially. But sometimes, when you're going down the rabbit hole, you're not thinking about, so how am I going to be able to use this in 5 years? You're just exploring it. You're enjoying the process. But
Yes.
maybe 5 years later, it just comes to you. And
Totally.
that's instead of, those dots that we collect, we start to connect them systematically. And this is the magic because I think Steve Jobs said something about this is like you're not able to connect the dots until you look back. So you
Yes.
have to move forward in a way so you can look and say, "Oh, this makes so much sense." And for
Yes.
someone else, it may say, and this we have to be careful with this when sometimes people like to accredit maybe, famous people or founders, whatever, they're so intelligent or whatever. Like, no, they put in the work. And through putting in the work, following their curiosity, they're now
Yes.
able to cash in on that in some ways
Yes.
and metaphorically even it's to say like they're able to connect the dots because that experience of living in this place, learning this language, having this
Yes.
experience, it just seamlessly comes together. And you're able, and for so many people that may seem like it may be mysterious or magical, it's clear to you, but you realize that you need to go through that, travel on that journey, have that trajectory in order to arrive to that place. So I totally agree with you on that sense.
Totally. Totally.
Totally. Okay, and our last topic that we're going to bring up, it's a big one.
Okay.
Is artificial intelligence. This is something
Wow.
that we are I mean, when we look back in history, we're part of an AI revolution in a way. This is kind of being
Totally.
compared to like, the internet in the early 90s. What are your thoughts on this?
Hmm. I think it's exciting. As you say, it's as exciting as the internet revolution times. It's scary also. The when ChatGPT became a thing, I had tried or I had read about like AI, but when ChatGPT became a thing, it was like very tangible, and I didn't sleep for the following. Like I slept less, let's say, for the following few nights because it changes so much. It can change so much of our reality of how we
Hmm.
are productive. And I'm a big believer in this idea of the future of abundance.
Hmm.
Another book drop, Abundance by Peter Diamandis. I actually even met Peter Diamandis when I was in Silicon Valley. It was great, huge. And I'm a big believer of that positive view. But I think disruption also has negative sides
Hmm.
and sometimes could be big, and then if in the history of humanity it's good, but there was, half a century that was very bad, but it's our half a century, then I'm not so sure I'm so excited about the future of abundance, right? So if for the
Hmm.
next half century is like, oh yes, by the way, all that generation or three generations don't know what to do with their life because there's no work, because AI took over. And then, yes, and then we solved it. And then everyone feels, lives happy because AI solved all the problems, health, wealth, well-being and everything. That's perfect, but it's scary at the same time
Hmm.
because I think it's very real. And I try to stay on the positive side and try to learn as much as possible and, potentially even, have to do something with it. I have reasons to believe, and you can start to see that some companies are using it positively for us to be more productive, more creative, more fulfilled, right? So I think that's what's happening.
Hmm.
Um, it even if it doesn't affect me, you know, I know it will affect other people, drivers, warehouse workers. Many uh, jobs are already, very close to be affected or being affected, and so when that happens, yeah, it's scary. We need to. I don't see that many solutions in that aspect. I think the Ludit, thing that happened in the industrial revolution, the Ludism that destroyed machines because they were taking their work, and now we look back in a century after and we're like, oh come on, like that was the beginning of such a wealthy times and abundant times for everyone. Well, yeah, but the people who was working that machine literally lost their job, and maybe took 5 years to find another one. So we're seeing a bad situation. It's not exactly that, but homelessness is a reality. For example, in Silicon Valley, especially obviously in San Francisco, it's not directly correlated to that, but there is people who is living in a van that works in a company, but they cannot afford a house in the most wealthy area or one of the most wealthiest areas in the world. And so I'm a little bit worried about that transition, and excited about the long term, but yeah, I'm hoping we'll, as much as I wanted to be here and just, voice my dreams, and someday I will do whatever, I ask it to do. I'm concerned about the transition, and I wish, more people was part of the solution. Like
Mm,
universal basic income, for example, seems to be a big conversation in the US. I think in Spain, as much criticized as it is as like, oh, we're not, whatever, the leading country in business. If you lose your job, you have, some protection. Health is protected, right? My daughter was born in a hospital, amazing hospital with views of these modernist, constructions, and like in Barcelona, and it was all paid by the government. Like this is, and these things, especially the US, that it's an example for other countries, needs to catch up, and it's not seems to be happening. And these things will be very important if AI takes over. You know, as much as there's this strong belief of meritocracy, and I'm a big believer in meritocracy, you cannot you cannot forget the less favored, the weakest, and so AI will accelerate the ability for people to make millions, to do big things, but there's people who have nothing to do with that, and they don't want to, and it's their right. And I think it would be healthier for everyone if we make sure that there's a protection net for the people who's not in touch with that disruption, or that will be the losers of
mm,
that disruption. That's my main concern. At the same time, as I said, I'm very excited about the potential of positive impact that will have for health, for even mental health. Like a really really smart AI helping you be the best version of yourself, um, and for any kind of like productivity and
mm.
ability to be creative and stuff. It's gonna be amazing. But again, it's like I just watched the other day
Yeah,
Oppenheimer, so I don't know if you watched Oppenheimer, but it's
I
like,
didn't see it.
science is powerful for good and for bad. And so we really need to be aware.
Mm. Exactly. It's something that it's continuously evolving. No one has a crystal ball to say exactly how it's going to evolve, but there has to be a certain level of, consciousness in terms of like, what is this for? What direction is this going? And if we make it more specific within, it's a hot topic. People want, even many companies are, dot AI. They're changing their companies to AI companies and things like this. So
Yes.
it's important. Like, don't let the hype, the get in the way. Don't let it cloud our judgment too much in some ways. And because in many cases where, in the FluentReads community, we're talking about empowering founders or whatever to actually, it's important. That's why it's important to also cultivate, yourself and connecting to that mission or your values in your business to actually say, well, is this in alignment with what we're doing or whatever? Not necessarily because this is a trend, because these people are doing this. And it can be quite complicated. It requires a bird's eye view. It's a holistic approach. But I
Yeah.
think you made a good point of you have to you can't think about it through like the lens of how much money is this going to generate. That's all I'm worried about.
Yes. I
Yeah,
totally agree. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I think, again, going back to what I said before about my degree, I'm realizing in this conversation that I'm using a lot of my degree, so it's a good thing. But I learned a lot about like a humanistic approach to
Mm,
learning. And so we learned a lot about dictatorships and nationalism and basically historic mistakes that we've made as humans. I wouldn't call myself like passionate about history, but when you learn about these things, or like now Oppenheimer, I think it helps you get that eye view eye bird, how did you say, bird's eye view,
Bird's
that
eye view, yeah.
bird's eye view that you mentioned, because you cannot, you cannot be having a huge impact and then say like, oh no, the negative consequences are not my fault.
Hmm.
They're your fault. I mean, they are humans' fault, but like there are conversation.
Exactly. I thank you so much, Jordi, for spending the time with the FluentReads community, giving us a lot of insights, a mini masterclass on the combination of books, relevant topics to the startup community. Lastly, because when we think about the English language, for example, we can divide it into the past, present, and future. So you, in your own journey, in your professional journey, we learned a little bit about your past, your present situation, and we all have a future. So if there's some advice that you could give to founders, to startup founders in some way, in along their journey or whatever, what would you, whether it's talking about books, whether it's talking about these topics, or anything that you would add that you think is relevant? You know how like sometimes they say if you could write a message on a billboard for the world to see, or you could write one post on the internet that everyone could see, you could take it in any direction you want. What would you say advice or recommendation or suggestions you would give to the Fluent Reads community?
It's a big
Yeah, sorry. Yes,
answer.
I
No, I love it. I love it. I'm
know.
just gonna take a moment, just a very quick moment to collect my thoughts. But I would say, well, I would say what we've been discussing. Stay curious and
Mm,
keep searching, and make sure, make sure you're just aligned with who you are, and that means finding out who you are. And
mm,
I don't think happiness is about just being like happy today, like somebody said, like a dog. A dog can be happy, but you don't want to be a dog, right? Necessarily,
yeah.
you want to be a human and take advantage of our intelligence. So I think that try to take advantage of your intelligence and try to do
Mm,
something that fulfills that potential, and then that it
mm,
makes you happy, right? It would,
yeah.
like you can be the most successful, but or the richest, right? But if you're not doing
Hmm.
something that makes you happy, find that balance, and you can still be
Yeah.
rich, very rich, if that, if you're happy. I think that's the
Mm,
sacrifice you have to decide to do, because I think sometimes people start companies, and
mm,
the idea of becoming wealthy seems to be one variable. The reality is that statistically, there's much better ways to be wealthy, many,
mm,
right? And so if that's the reason you're doing it, rethink, because the reality is that's not necessarily the way to be the happiest, because it's intense,
exactly.
because it's a lot of effort. So that's what at least I'm coming to the conclusion in my own life, and hopefully it
Okay.
will serve somebody.
Great, great, great. I love the way I think that's great advice and highlighting the curiosity. It is the ultimate return on investment, the ultimate,
Yes.
ROI following that curiosity. And sometimes I like to add an H to this, the ROI and HRI, a holistic return on investment, because sometimes we're so focused on what's on the spreadsheet or what
Yeah.
is the return on this. But if we step back and have that bird's eye view, that holistic return on investment, you'll start to see that, oh, I need to cultivate the curiosity. I need to actually engage on that, or maybe go on this, I don't know, yoga retreat, or I need
Yes.
to read this book. There's so many, just finding your own formula
Yeah.
to say, okay, this is actually going to help push me more in the direction that I
Yes.
want to go in. So yes, yes, yes,
Totally.
yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much,
Thank
Jordi.
you.
Thank you
My
for your
pleasure. I
contribution.
enjoyed it very
Take
much.
care. All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank